Now let us be very still for a moment and look not outwardly, but inwardly at what it is we have been taught to expect when we hear the words Christ consciousness. Because almost everyone who comes to this teaching comes with an expectation, and that expectation itself is the barrier. We have been trained very subtly to believe that something is going to happen to us, that there will be a moment, an experience, an illumination, a feeling, or perhaps a great inward event that we will be able to point to and say, now it has happened. Now I have attained Christ consciousness. And I want to say to you very gently but very firmly that this is the great misunderstanding. The human mind cannot help itself. It lives by events. It lives by beginnings and endings. It lives by before and after. And so when the mind hears of Christ consciousness, it immediately translates that into something it can recognize, something it can remember, something it can experience. But the Christ is not known that way. The Christ never appears as an event in time. The Christ is never something that happens to you, and the very moment you are waiting for something to happen, you have already removed yourself from the awareness of what is. Jesus never said the kingdom of God will come to you with signs. He said the very opposite. The kingdom of God cometh not with observation. That means it does not come with fireworks. It does not come with sensations. It does not come with emotional highs. It does not come with visions or voices or feelings that rise and fall. And yet, generation after generation, we have been trained to look for exactly those things and to mistake them for spiritual attainment. Now, do not misunderstand me. Experiences may come. They may come and they may go. There may be moments of deep peace, moments of illumination, moments of joy, moments of release. But if they come, they will go. And anything that comes and goes is not Christ. Before Abraham was I am. That which says I am does not arrive, and it does not depart. It is not born, and it does not die. It is not intensified, and it is not diminished. It simply is. Here is where the difficulty lies. The personal sense of self wants proof. It wants evidence. It wants assurance. It wants to say, I felt something, or I saw something, or I experienced something. But the Christ does not give you something to report. The Christ removes the reporter. That is why this teaching is so unsettling to the human sense. There is nothing here for the ego to collect. There is no spiritual trophy. There is no testimony that can be repeated with pride. There is no moment you can frame and hang on the wall of memory. When the Israelites asked for signs, they were given signs, but they wandered for 40 years. When Jesus was tempted to prove himself, he refused. He did not turn stones into bread to satisfy the senses. He did not leap from the temple to impress the crowd. He withdrew. Always he withdrew. Always he went apart. Always he entered the silence. And it is in that silence, not as an experience, but as a surrender, that the Christ is recognized. We must come to see that the hunger for spiritual experience is still hunger for self-confirmation. It is still the personal sense saying, let me know that I have arrived. But the Christ is not something you arrive at. The Christ is what remains when the one who wants to arrive has been gently set aside. He must increase, but I must decrease. This is not poetry. This is not metaphor. This is the literal truth of spiritual awakening. The world today is filled with people chasing spiritual sensations, chasing awakenings, chasing activations, chasing states of consciousness that rise and fall like waves on the ocean. But Christ is not a wave. Christ is the ocean itself. And the ocean does not announce itself with excitement. It does not surge to prove its presence. It simply supports all that appears upon it. When you seek Christ consciousness as an experience, you are still assuming separation. You are assuming that there is you here and Christ there, and that someday the distance will be crossed. But Jesus never taught separation. He said, I and my Father are one, not will become one, not will feel one, one already, always. And if that is true of him, it must be true of you, or it is not true at all. So we begin here not by reaching, not by striving, not by waiting for something to happen, but by letting go of the expectation that anything must happen. We begin by questioning the very desire for experience. We begin by noticing how the mind is always leaning into the future, always anticipating a moment that will justify its efforts. And we gently, without force, without condemnation, allow that leaning to relax. Be still and know that I am God. Not do something and know. Not experience something and know. Be still. And in that stillness, you will discover that the Christ was never absent. It was only obscured by the noise of seeking. Christ consciousness is not dramatic. It is not exciting. It is not sensational. And because of that, most people pass it by. They are waiting for thunder, and they miss the still small voice. They are waiting for fire, and they overlook the light that has always been shining. But to the one who is willing to stop seeking an experience, something extraordinary happens, not as an event, but as a realization. The search begins to dissolve. And where the search dissolves, the Christ stands revealed, quietly, impersonally, eternally. Now, having seen that the seeking of an experience is the great misunderstanding, we must go a little deeper and see why this is so. We must understand something very fundamental about experience itself. Experience, by its very nature, belongs to the human sense of self. It belongs to that which observes, records, remembers, and compares. Experience always presupposes two things: one who experiences, and something that is experienced. And wherever there are two, the Christ has not yet been realized. Let us be very clear about this. If you say, I experienced God, then there is still an I standing apart from God. If you say, I entered Christ consciousness, then there is still a personal self who believes it has moved from one place to another. But the Christ is not entered. The Christ is not attained. The Christ is not contacted. The Christ is not experienced. The Christ is what you are before the experiencer arises. Jesus never said, you shall experience the Father. He said, the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. Notice the language. There is no claim of experience here. There is no personal appropriation. There is only recognition. There is only yielding. There is only the quiet disappearance of the personal sense into something greater that has always been present. Now, the human mind is very clever. It can spiritualize itself. It can take mystical language and use it to reinforce its own continuity. It can say, I had a deep meditation, or I felt the presence, or I was filled with light. And all the while, the personal self remains intact, strengthened even by the belief that it has become spiritual. But the Christ does not enhance the personal self. The Christ replaces it. Here is a truth that must be faced if we are to go on. Everything that can be experienced can also be lost. Everything that can be felt can also be unfelt. Everything that can be remembered can also be forgotten. And that is why experiences, no matter how beautiful, no matter how profound, cannot be the foundation of spiritual life. They leave you always vulnerable to their absence. They leave you always wondering what went wrong when they fade. But Christ does not fade. Christ does not fluctuate. Christ does not rise one day and fall the next. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. That which is forever cannot be known as an event in time. It cannot be grasped by the senses. It cannot be registered by the emotions. It can only be recognized when the mind ceases its effort to grasp. This is why the scriptures say, "Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared." Notice that, have not entered into the heart of man. Why? Because God does not enter. God is. And when you stop waiting for God to enter, you may discover that you have been living in God all along. The personal sense of self wants assurance through experience because it lives in fear of uncertainty. It wants to know, am I progressing? Am I advancing? Am I awakening? But Christ consciousness does not measure progress. It ends the measurer. It does not give the mind something to track. It takes the mind out of the center altogether. This is why Jesus said, "He that loseth his life for my sake shall find it." He did not say, "He that improves his life." He did not say, "He that spiritualizes his life." He said, "loseth." And what is lost? The life that lives by experience. The life that depends on feeling, on knowing, on perceiving. That life must gently, willingly be laid down. Now, I know that this can sound frightening to the human sense. It can feel as if something is being taken away, but nothing real is ever taken away. Only that which was never true is surrendered. When the experiencer loosens its grip, what remains is not emptiness. What remains is being, I am that I am. Not I experienced, not I felt, not I became, I am. The Christ is never an object of awareness. It is awareness itself. And awareness cannot be experienced because it is that which experiences. You cannot step outside of it to observe it. You can only cease identifying with what you are not. And this is the great simplicity of the teaching, a simplicity so radical that the mind resists it at every turn. So we do not ask, what did I experience today? We do not ask, did I feel the Christ? We do not ask, was my meditation deep enough? These questions belong to the human sense of self, and they keep that sense alive. Instead, we begin to notice something far more subtle. We begin to notice when reaction fades. We begin to notice when fear loses its grip. We begin to notice when the urgency to become something spiritual quietly dissolves. And in that quiet dissolution, without announcement, without sensation, without experience, the Christ stands revealed not as something new, but as that which has always been present, waiting patiently for the one who experiences to step aside. Now we come to a point where the human mind begins to feel distinctly uncomfortable, because here we must let go of one of its most cherished habits, the habit of defining itself. The moment we move from thinking of Christ consciousness as an experience to seeing that it is not even a state, we are brought face to face with a far more radical truth. Christ is not something you enter into. Christ is your identity, revealed when the false sense of identity is relinquished. We have been taught, almost universally, to think in terms of states of consciousness, higher states, lower states, awakened states, unawakened states, and while this language may be useful at an elementary level, it becomes a hindrance when we approach the Christ. For a state is something you can be in today and out of tomorrow. A state can deepen or shallow. A state can fluctuate. But Christ does not fluctuate. Christ is not more present one day and less present the next. Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. That statement alone should tell us that we are not dealing with a state. If Christ were a state, then Jesus could lose it. If Christ were a state, then Paul could fall out of it. If Christ were a state, then it could be threatened by circumstance, by illness, by fear, by sin, or by failure. But Paul tells us plainly, I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. Notice again the language. He does not say, Christ visits me. He does not say, Christ fills me at times. He says, liveth in me. And then he goes even further, yet not I. That is identity language. That is not experience language. The personal sense of self is built entirely on identity. It knows itself by name, by history, by memory, by role, by achievement, by failure, and when it hears of Christ, it tries to add Christ to that structure. It wants to become a spiritual person, a Christ-conscious person, a person who now has something more than others. But Christ does not decorate the human identity. Christ dissolves it. This is why Jesus speaks so uncompromisingly. Call no man your father upon the earth. Whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. If any man come to me and hate not his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. These are not moral statements. They are not demands for self-loathing. They are precise descriptions of what must fall away if Christ is to be revealed as identity rather than accessory. Christ is not your higher self. Christ is not your best version. Christ is not the spiritual improvement of the human person. Christ is that which stands when the entire structure of personal identity is seen for what it is, a useful but temporary sense of self, never intended to be the seat of life. This is why the revelation of Christ consciousness feels so impersonal. It does not say you are special. It says there is only one. It does not say you have arrived. It says there never was a distance. It does not exalt the individual. It removes the individual as the center. And this, to the human mind, feels like loss. But to the soul, it feels like rest. Jesus never defended a personal identity. When asked who he was, he did not say, I am Jesus of Nazareth. He said, before Abraham was, I am. He spoke from identity, not biography. He spoke from being, not becoming. And when that same I am is recognized as the truth of your own being, something extraordinary happens, not outwardly, but inwardly. The burden of maintaining a self begins to lift. You see, the personal sense of self is always working. It is always managing. It is always protecting. It is always striving to survive. to succeed, to be secure. But when Christ is recognized as identity, there is a shift so subtle that the mind may miss it entirely. Life continues. Circumstances may look the same. And yet there is a quiet knowing that I am not the doer. The Father within doeth the works. At this point, the question is no longer, how do I attain Christ consciousness? That question falls away. The question becomes, what am I still holding on to that prevents me from recognizing what already is? And often, what we are holding on to is the belief that we must remain someone in order to live. But the great paradox of the Christ is this: when the false sense of self loosens, life does not end, it begins. So Christ consciousness is not a state you visit. It is not a level you maintain. It is not something you practice. It is the revelation that there is only one life, one being, one presence, and that this presence has been living your life all along, patiently waiting for you to stop claiming it as your own. Now we come to something that may seem at first almost too simple to be true, and yet it is the very heart of the teaching. If Christ is not an experience, and if Christ is not a state, and if Christ is not something added to the human self, then it must follow inevitably that Christ is not revealed through practice. And this is where many sincere students stumble, because they have been taught all their lives that spiritual attainment is the result of discipline, effort, repetition, and method. Let us look at this very calmly. A practice is something you do. A method is something you apply. A technique is something you perform in order to achieve a result. But we have already seen that Christ is not a result. Christ is not an outcome. Christ is not something produced by correct procedure. And therefore, no practice, no matter how refined, can reveal that which is already fully present. This does not mean that practices are wrong. It means they are limited. They can quiet the mind to a degree. They can refine thought. They can prepare consciousness, but they cannot cross the final threshold, because the final threshold is not crossed by effort. It is crossed by surrender, not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord. And spirit does not respond to human effort. Spirit responds to availability. Silence, as we speak of it here, is not a practice. Silence is not something you do for 20 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes at night. Silence is not a discipline. Silence is the absence of interference. Silence is what remains when the mind stops trying to reach God, please God, understand God, or use God. Silence is the state in which the personal self has, even if only momentarily, stepped out of the way. Jesus did not give techniques. He did not outline methods. He did not teach his disciples how to pray in order to get results. In fact, he warned them against much speaking. When ye pray, use not vain repetitions. And again, your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask him. If the Father already knows, then what is the function of prayer? Surely not persuasion, surely not instruction, surely not effort. Prayer, in its highest sense, is listening. Now, listening requires silence, and silence cannot be manufactured. The moment you try to be silent, you are already engaged in activity. Silence comes when the need to do something falls away. Silence comes when the mind, exhausted of its own efforts, becomes still. And in that stillness, not because you have earned it, not because you have done it correctly, but because there is no longer resistance, the Christ reveals itself. This is why the scriptures say, in quietness and in confidence shall be your strength, not in striving, not in effort, not in performance. Quietness, confidence. Confidence in what? Confidence that God is. Confidence that the kingdom is within. Confidence that nothing needs to be added, achieved, or fixed before God can be present. That confidence dissolves the frantic activity of the human mind, and where that activity dissolves, silence naturally appears. Many students believe that silence means emptiness, and they fear it. They fear that if they stop thinking, stop affirming, stop praying, stop seeking, they will be left with nothing. But silence is not nothingness. Silence is fullness, unrecognized by thought. Silence is consciousness resting in itself. Silence is the ground in which the word becomes flesh, not spoken, not declared, but lived. You will notice something important here. Silence does not give you information. Silence does not explain. Silence does not answer questions in the way the mind expects. And yet, when you come out of silence, if we can even use such a phrase, you may find that fear has loosened, that urgency has faded, that reaction has softened. You may find that problems no longer carry the same weight. And this is not because you have solved them. It is because you are no longer standing apart from life trying to manage it. Elijah did not find God in the wind. He did not find God in the earthquake. He did not find God in the fire. He found God in the still small voice. And that voice is not a sound. It is an awareness. It is a knowing. It is the gentle certainty that I am. And when that I am is recognized, not thought about, not spoken about, but recognized, the need for practice begins to fall away. So we do not abandon practice in rebellion. We outgrow it in understanding. We do not stop meditating because it is wrong. We stop relying on meditation to give us Christ. We let silence do what silence alone can do. Remove the illusion that something must happen for God to be present. And when that illusion falls, the Christ stands revealed, not dramatically, not spectacularly, but with a quiet authority that does not need to announce itself. It simply is. And in that isness, there is rest. Now we come to a point that often surprises and sometimes disappoints the earnest student. After all the years of seeking, after the longing, the prayer, the discipline, the study, the hope that someday something decisive will occur, the recognition of Christ comes, and it does not announce itself. There is no great sound. There is no flash of light. There is no emotional wave that carries you away. In fact, very often, the first reaction of the human mind is to say, nothing happened. And that statement, paradoxically, is very close to the truth. You see, the Christ does not enter consciousness the way a thought enters. It does not arrive the way an experience arrives. It does not come as something added. The Christ is recognized in the absence of addition. It is known not by what appears, but by what ceases to appear, and what ceases is the restless movement of the personal sense, the constant evaluating, anticipating, wondering whether something is happening or not. This is why so many people miss the moment of recognition. They are waiting for a feeling, and the Christ comes as certainty. They are waiting for peace, and the Christ comes as stillness beneath peace and disturbance alike. They are waiting for joy, and the Christ comes as an unshakable simplicity that does not rise or fall. My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. The world gives feelings. The Christ gives being. When the Christ is recognized, there is often a sense of ordinariness that surprises the mind. Life looks the same. The room is the same. The body is the same. The problems may even appear to be the same. And yet, something subtle has shifted. The center has moved. You are no longer standing outside of life, trying to manage it. You are resting within life, allowing it to unfold. This is why the human mind says nothing happened. It judges by sensation, by excitement, by contrast. But the Christ does not come in contrast. The Christ comes as continuity. It does not interrupt life. It underlies it. It does not replace one state with another. It reveals what has always been present beneath all states. Think of the words of Jesus. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell whence it cometh, and whither it goeth. The Christ is known in its effects, not in its arrival. You may not be able to say when it came, but you will notice that fear has less authority. You will notice that reaction has lost some of its urgency. You will notice that you are not so quick to defend, to explain, to justify. These are the evidences, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The personal sense wants to claim the moment. It wants to say, now I know. But the Christ does not belong to the knower. The Christ dissolves the knower. That is why there is no story to tell. That is why there is no testimony that satisfies the ego. The moment you try to describe it, you find that words fail. Behold, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. It does not yet appear, not because it is hidden, but because appearance is no longer the measure. Many students leave at this point. They go back to seeking experiences, teachings, practices, because the simplicity feels too bare. They say, surely this cannot be it. But what they are really saying is, surely there must be something for me. And Christ consciousness does not give you something. It removes the sense that you are missing something. When the Christ is recognized, there is no inner voice saying, you have arrived. There is simply the quiet absence of the question, am I there yet? And that absence is freedom. That absence is rest. That absence is the Sabbath, not a day, but a state of being in which striving has ended. Jesus did not celebrate moments of awakening. He lived from a continuous awareness. He did not point to experiences. He pointed to fruits. By their fruits ye shall know them. And the fruits are not visions or feelings. The fruits are love, gentleness, patience, non-resistance, trust. The fruits appear naturally when the tree is rooted in its own being. So, if you find yourself saying, nothing happened, stay there. Do not rush away. Do not seek another method. Do not judge the moment. That nothing may be the first taste of reality untouched by the need to become something else. That nothing may be the silence in which the Christ is quietly known not as an experience, but as the ground of your being. Now we come to the point where all spiritual pretenses are stripped away and where the teaching becomes unmistakably practical. If Christ consciousness is not an experience, and if it is not a state, and if it does not announce itself with sensation, then how are we to know that it is present? The answer is very simple and very uncompromising. The only evidence of Christ consciousness is non-reaction. Faith is not what you say you believe. Faith is not what you declare. Faith is not what you affirm when things are going well. Faith is revealed by your reaction or your lack of reaction when appearances confront you. Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? Jesus did not ask this when the sea was calm. He asked it in the storm. The personal sense reacts automatically. It reacts to good and evil, to gain and loss, to praise and criticism, to health and disease. Reaction is the signature of belief in two powers. Reaction says, this appearance has authority over me. Reaction says, something outside myself can disturb my peace. And as long as reaction governs consciousness, Christ's consciousness has not yet been realized, no matter how many experiences one may have had. Now, do not misunderstand this. Non-reaction is not suppression. It is not indifference. It is not a human attempt to remain calm. Non-reaction is the natural state of consciousness when there is no longer a personal self standing apart from life, trying to defend itself. When Christ is recognized as identity, reaction fades because there is no longer a center to be threatened. This is why Jesus could say, resist not evil. This is one of the most misunderstood statements in Scripture. It does not mean that evil is real and should be tolerated. It means that evil has no reality to resist. Resistance gives reality. Reaction gives power. And Christ's consciousness sees through appearance without engaging it. When the Christ is present, appearances still arise. Problems may still present themselves. The body may still have sensations. The world may still produce conflict. But the response is different. There is a pause where there used to be panic. There is stillness where there used to be struggle. There is trust where there used to be control. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because a shadow has no substance. Here is where many deceive themselves. They believe that Christ consciousness will remove appearances. They believe it will fix conditions. They believe it will rearrange the outer world. But Christ consciousness does something far more radical. It removes your belief in the authority of appearances. And when that belief is gone, appearances collapse of their own weight. Non-reaction is not something you practice. It is something that happens when you are no longer personally involved. When the Christ is recognized, you do not have to remind yourself not to react. Reaction simply loses its footing. The situation may still be addressed. Action may still be taken. But it is action without anxiety, movement without fear, response without resistance. This is why Jesus could sleep in the boat. The storm did not disturb him because he was not living from the level of appearances. And when the disciples cried out, he did not rebuke the storm first. He rebuked their fear. Where is your faith? Faith, again, is not belief. Faith is trust so complete that reaction becomes unnecessary. If you want to know whether Christ consciousness is dawning in your life, do not ask what you feel in meditation. Look instead at how you respond to discord. Look at how quickly you rush to fix, to judge, to control, and then notice when, even slightly, there is more space. That space is the Christ revealing itself, not as power, but as peace. The Christ does not fight appearances. The Christ outlives them. And when you find yourself standing without reaction, without fear, without urgency, you are standing on holy ground, not because something special has happened, but because something false has fallen away. Now, at this point in the unfolding of truth, something very important must be faced, because this is the place where many sincere students quietly turn back. not because the teaching is false, and not because it has failed them, but because it offers no reward to the personal sense of self. And the human mind, unless it is very gently watched, will always seek some form of compensation for its efforts. Most people abandon this path because it does not gratify the ego. There is no sense of progress that can be measured. There is no ladder to climb. There is no moment when one can say, I am now more spiritual than I was yesterday. The teaching strips away comparison, and comparison is the currency of the human mind. Without comparison, the mind feels lost. When the early enthusiasm fades, when the experiences quiet down, when the emotional highs subside, when the excitement of discovery settles into ordinariness, the mind begins to whisper, perhaps this isn't working. But what it really means is, perhaps I am not being entertained. And Christ consciousness was never meant to entertain the mind. It was meant to liberate the soul. Jesus spoke of this when he said, many are called, but few are chosen. The calling is universal. Everyone is invited, but few are willing to remain when there is nothing to grasp, nothing to feel, nothing to show. Few are willing to stand in the nakedness of being without adornment. And yet, that nakedness is the very doorway. Another reason people turn away is that this path does not promise control. The human sense wants assurance that things will turn out well, that health will improve, that circumstances will change, that life will become predictable. But Christ consciousness does not give control over life. It gives freedom from the need to control life. And to the ego, that can feel like danger. Remember the rich young ruler. He came sincerely. He had kept the commandments. He wanted eternal life. And when Jesus said, sell all that thou hast and follow me, he went away sorrowful. Why? Because the cost was identity. The cost was security. The cost was the self-image he had carefully built. And so it is with us. We may follow gladly until the point where following requires letting go of who we think we are. Many also abandon this path because it offers no quick answers to the world's problems. It does not align with political sides. It does not justify anger. It does not sanctify fear. It does not tell us who is right and who is wrong. And the mind, which thrives on judgment, feels disoriented. But Christ consciousness does not take sides. My kingdom is not of this world. That does not mean it ignores the world. It means it does not derive its authority from appearances. When you no longer react, people may say you are indifferent. When you no longer argue, people may say you are passive. When you no longer seek to prove anything, people may say you have withdrawn. But what has really happened is that you have stepped out of the hypnotism of collective belief. You are no longer feeding the drama, and drama requires participation to survive. There is also a subtle loneliness that can arise at this stage, not because you are separated from others, but because you are no longer joined to them through shared fear, shared outrage, or shared striving. This is the loneliness Jesus experienced when he said, "Could ye not watch with me 1 hour?" It is not the loneliness of isolation. It is the loneliness of standing in truth when others are not yet ready. But this is precisely the point where perseverance, not effort, but faith must quietly take root. Faith not as belief, but as trust. Trust that what is being revealed does not need reinforcement. Trust that the absence of sensation is not the absence of God. Trust that silence is not emptiness. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed. Blessed are they who do not require proof, Those who remain, who do not rush away to the next teaching, the next method, the next promise, begin to discover something extraordinary. Life simplifies. The need to explain diminishes. The urgency to fix the world lessens, and in its place, there is a steady, quiet knowing that life itself is sufficient, that God is present, and that nothing essential is missing. This is not a dramatic victory. It is a quiet fidelity. It is remaining when there is no applause. It is standing when there is no movement. It is trusting when there is no evidence. And this, more than anything else, marks the dawning of Christ consciousness, not as an attainment, but as a way of being that no longer depends on becoming. Now we come to a point of such simplicity that the human mind almost always overlooks it. Having heard all this, having seen that Christ is not an experience, not a state, not something to be attained or practiced, the mind immediately tries to do something with that understanding. It says, very well, now I must live from Christ. And in that very moment, without realizing it, it steps back into the personal sense and begins again. You cannot live from Christ by trying to live from Christ. The moment there is effort, the moment there is intention, the moment there is a sense of I must, the personal self has quietly reclaimed the center. Christ does not need to be lived from. Christ lives, and when the personal sense of living loosens, Christ simply lives where the effort used to be. Jesus never tried to live from God. He did not wake up in the morning and remind himself to be spiritual. He did not plan how to express the Father that day. He rested in the awareness that I can of mine own self do nothing. That is not a confession of weakness. It is the statement of freedom, where there is no sense of personal doership. There is no burden of performance. This is why the Christ life feels so ordinary. You go about your day, you attend to what is before you, you answer what needs answering, you act when action is required, and yet there is a difference that is difficult to describe. There is no inner commentary. There is no constant measuring of whether you are doing it right. There is no anxiety about outcomes. Take therefore no thought for the morrow, not because tomorrow will be perfect, but because life does not require your anxious supervision. When you stop trying to live from Christ, you may notice that decisions arise without strain. Words come without rehearsal. Silence appears without being cultivated. You find yourself less inclined to explain, less inclined to justify, less inclined to correct others. Not because you have adopted a spiritual attitude, but because there is no longer a personal identity that needs defending. This is the great paradox. The less you try to live spiritually, the more spiritual life expresses itself. The less you try to be guided, the more guidance unfolds naturally. The less you attempt to surrender, the more surrender happens of its own accord. Not I, but Christ. That statement does not describe an achievement. It describes a disappearance. At this stage, many students worry that they will become careless or irresponsible if they stop trying. But Christ consciousness does not produce carelessness. It produces clarity. It does not produce passivity. It produces right action. It does not remove intelligence. It removes interference. The mind, freed from the burden of managing life, becomes a useful instrument rather than a tyrant. You may also notice that life does not become problem-free. Conditions still arise. Challenges still appear. The world does not suddenly conform to your preferences, but something fundamental has changed. You are no longer living against life. You are living with it. And that cooperation brings a peace that does not depend on circumstances. Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." A yoke is still a yoke. There is still movement, still responsibility, but it is shared. The burden is light because it is no longer carried by a personal sense struggling to survive. It is carried by life itself, expressing through you without resistance. Living from Christ, then, is not something you remember to do. It is what happens when you forget yourself. It is not something you sustain by vigilance. It sustains itself when vigilance relaxes. It is not maintained by faith in a teaching, but by the quiet recognition that there is only one life, and that this life is living you. And when this is seen even dimly, even intermittently, there is a gentle humor that arises. You see how hard you once tried. You see how serious you were about becoming spiritual. And you smile not in ridicule, but in compassion for the self that thought it had to carry the weight of existence. Now we come to the place where words themselves must begin to fall away. Because if anything has been revealed through all that has been said, it is this: Christ consciousness is not something that can be concluded. It cannot be summarized. It cannot be claimed. The moment you think you have understood it, the understanding itself becomes the veil. The human mind always wants an ending. It wants a conclusion it can carry away. It wants something it can say, "Now I know." But Christ is not known that way. Christ is known only in the degree that the need to know dissolves. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. The door is not opened by effort. It opens when resistance ends. At this point, there must be a very gentle but very complete letting go, not only of seeking, not only of effort, but even of spiritual identity. Not "I am a seeker," not "I am awakened," not "I live from Christ." Even these must go. For as long as there is an I claiming something, there is still separation, and Christ is not divided. Jesus did not say, "I have found the truth." He said, "I am the truth." And even that was not spoken from a personal sense. It was spoken from the disappearance of the personal sense. That is why he could also say, "Why callest thou me good? There is none good but God." He refused every attempt to turn truth into personal possession. So we do not leave here today with a new concept. We do not leave with a new practice. We do not leave with a new identity. If anything, we leave with less certainty, less definition, less grasping. And that is a blessing. "Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven." A child does not explain life. A child lives it. There is no final statement that can be made about Christ consciousness. There is no declaration that seals it. There is no experience that confirms it. There's only a quiet willingness to stand without leaning on thought, without reaching for assurance, without demanding proof. And in that standing, something takes over, not dramatically, not visibly, but effectively. The scriptures say, "The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace." Holding your peace does not mean suppressing fear. It means ceasing to claim authorship of your life. It means allowing life to live itself as you, without interference. And when this is allowed, you will find that things are handled not always as you would choose, but always as they must be when truth is present. So do not try to remember this teaching. Do not quote it to yourself, Do not apply it to problems. That would only turn it into another tool of the mind. Let it go. Let it sink beneath thought. Let it do its own work. The seed is the word of God. And a seed does not grow because you pull on it. It grows because it is left alone. Christ consciousness is not something you take with you. It is what remains when you stop taking yourself so seriously. It is what stands revealed when there is no longer a need to become anything at all. And when that is so, life moves on quietly, simply, naturally, without the burden of self, without the drama of attainment, without the fear of loss. There is nothing more to say. There is nowhere else to go. There is nothing to do. I am.